This is Brian Underhill, CEO of CoachSource. We're sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties to get our esteemed speaker into the room, and she's joining the room now. So I'd like to be the first to say hello to everybody. And let me get my screen sharing started. If you are so inclined, we'd love to say hello. Please add your hellos to the chat. And if you would like your LinkedIn, if you'd like people to network, if you'd like to network with each other, you're welcome to say your hello in the chat and add your LinkedIn there. And of course, we'll have ways for you to interact with us by putting in questions through the chat and so forth. So today we're going to be talking about cross-cultural leadership challenges, always a fascinating area and something you might not know when we founded CoachSource, and actually well before that. Those of you who may not know my history, I've been in this field of coaching about 30 years, and I started with Marshall Goldsmith, and the first thing we were trying to do was find coaches in other parts of the world, because we only had a handful of coaches in the United States. So I started doing searches however I could. It wasn't as easy back then in the 90s. And I noticed that coaches in other parts of the world were usually intercultural experts. And I started to find a way to look for coaches by going to places where intercultural consultants hung out, listservs and things like that back in those days. And I would find someone, say, in Singapore who is an intercultural expert. They could be an expat, they could be a local, but really one of the main things they did was help leaders work interculturally. Often it's someone coming over from a different country, landing in the country where they are, and then they would get hired to help that leader be more effective in that environment. And so that became an early place where CoachSource would find coaches around the world. And some of those intercultural experts are still with us today. And so really interesting beginnings to how we would find coaches in faraway places. So today, not only are we learning intercultural leadership skills, we're also joined by a C-suite coach of ours. So I'd like to first briefly, not everyone knows as much about CoachSource's C-suite advisory practice, but we have a very niche, very targeted, specific practice of C-suite advisors and coaches and consultants, and many of them are former C-suite executives themselves. Others are super decorated in that, they don't need to have been a C-suite because you may already know their name from everything else they've done. And so clients will call us periodically for the very top of the house, where they need curated suggestions of coaches to work at the very top of their house. And we handle that at CoachSource, usually myself personally as the CEO or our chief coaching officer, along with the rest of our team. We will learn more about the specific need and specifically, curate and select a couple of our best choices for that to share with our client, and then of course facilitate everything that happens thereafter. So that's our C-suite advisory package, and Jenny is one of those coaches. She is very well decorated. So listen as I try to introduce her, because she has one of the best bios I've seen. So she of course, she is intercultural herself. So she came to the States with her sister at just the age of 12 from the Dominican Republic and landed in New York City and began her life here in the States at that point. And she went to Columbia for undergrad. She also got a master's there, started her business career, and Jason's putting up her bio there. She worked at various corporations, Kraft, Mondelez, Merlin Entertainments, Accenture, got a Kellogg MBA as well, did a stint in China as an expat leader, chief marketing officer. She's today a professor at Columbia, a professor at NYU. She's an ICF PCC, a regular contributor at HBR and Fast Company. And as if she has any time, she's also working on her PhD today. So incredibly well decorated. But put that all aside, she's actually one of the friendliest people I know. Super fun to chat with. So we love knowing Jenny. She's also very well followed on LinkedIn and so on and so forth. So please give her a follow. She's posting quite regularly. So let's bring Jenny on. Jason, I don't see her face yet unless I'm in the wrong screen, which is always likely.
Oh, Jenny will have to turn on her camera.
Ah, okay. Here we go. And unmute for that matter. Hopefully she's not having trouble doing that. We were having some difficulty there.
Yes.
There it comes.
No problem. Thank you.
Yay!
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Brian, and everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world joining us. Again, grateful to be here, and thank you for such a warm introduction, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, I see myself as a global leader, given all of my experiences, especially integrating myself to the US, growing up here, being such a diverse, cultural mosaic, and then really going globally, working and living in Asia. At the time, I was the director for Oreo cookies in Asia Pacific, hopefully a brand that you know and love. And it was just an amazing experience having oversight of 13 countries in the Asia region, and basically managing the second largest country in the world for the brand, China, and at the same time, the fastest growing region. So that kind of experience really empowered me to flex my leadership style, to learn how to work with senior leaders and with country leaders and owners who didn't really need oversight, but we were working to build the first global brand for the company at the time. So again, that experience really kind of pushed me into learning how to become a coach. When I came back from China to the US in 2015, I started my coaching practice as a side business, obviously avoiding any conflict of interest. But it was a trend that we were seeing here, people with side hustles and really learning how to navigate multiple aspects of their career. And that's what brought me really into coaching. I felt so empowered helping leaders in different countries across cultures grow their markets, navigate the power of the big company to really leverage all of the great things that make a global corporation work so that they can feel empowered to fight the many local players that they were fighting at the time. So just to set the stage, hopefully that explains a little bit, Brian, of who I am and how I became basically an executive coach, and how do I work with senior leaders, working across cultures, across borders, to empower hybrid teams, global teams, and to truly make a global impact and navigate and basically help the organization move forward.
Fantastic. Oreo cookies too, even better. Even better. So wait, I mean, of course, you've led for many years you worked as a leader for many years, being cross-cultural yourself. So what are those challenges you find when you're leading other cultures compared to maybe leading within the culture that you're most familiar with? What are those challenges that you found in your career or leaders find today?
Yeah, no, so this is a great question, Brian. And I would say that, again, it really goes back to what are the assumptions that we bring as leaders, right? For example, I'll speak, firsthand as someone, that kind of grew up in the US and was schooled here. It's really that we're used to being the head of the business or the head of the division, the brand, if you're a marketer. And we're have usually cross-functional teams working with us, supporting us. And that's part of what makes us great, right? We are drivers. We are results driven. However, when you're working across different cultures, there's a different set of expectations. We sometimes get made fun of as Americans because we work, well, we seem to live to work versus work to live.
Yes, yes.
So I think changing those expectations so that we are adjusting our leadership style to manage the people across different cultures is really key. We cannot expect the same work ethic or discipline as we expect and demand here from other countries. And again, it's just really to make sure that we are understanding who we're speaking to or who we're managing, right? Who sits across the world, and what does success look like for them. So a quick example, and I'll share from, both from my time in the leadership side and also as a coach. When I was working in Asia, one of the biggest projects that I had was actually, working with my India team. This was a team where Oreo had just been there for 4 years versus 100 years in the US. So that team was actually very, very keen to do everything that worked in the US and try to replicate it in the country. However, I was actually given the mandate to innovate and to challenge them to really make it a local product that could fight the competition, that could really answer the needs of the consumer there. So I really had to come across as a humble leader, as somebody who was listening. So imagine really I was really playing their coach, right? Asking them, what does the consumer truly want? Both the consumer that buys the product and the consumer that we want them to buy the product. And one of the biggest insights that we found is that actually locally, people who didn't know Oreo, Brian, thought the product was burnt because it was so dark, and they had grown up with Cadbury Dairy Milk as their ideal chocolate. So that was a milk chocolate. So just understanding that insight, right? What is the problem you're looking to solve for? And empowering that individual, that leader, to flex and change within the parameters that are going to make them feel successful was really impactful. And, so that's just something that it was, very keen, because to that leader across the world, they felt that being a mirror image of what was success in the US was what they needed to follow, versus feeling empowered to address the needs of the local market.
Mm-hmm. By the way, did you guys do something with the burnt perception? Were you able to do something?
Yes. We actually gave parameters as to how much you could flex the brand, meaning how much chocolate you could put, the color parameters of the brand, so that while we still had a global image and a global taste, the local countries still had some wiggle room in terms of how much they could flex to address the local need.
Yeah. No.
So well, that global framework, global and local.
I think we all know. I imagine something like Coca-Cola changes the formula a bit, because my Diet Cokes in other countries don't taste like I'm used to here in the States. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like.
If you drink regular, real sugar, I think is used in Mexico and in the Europe. And then here, I think, we have other formulas. So
yeah. Well, so, I mean, this all requires trust, of course, working across cultures, and you're even alluding to it in what you're saying. And is there a word that can help us, that helps capture the biggest trust challenge across cultures? Is there a word you would use to describe that?
Yes. I would say consistency. And the reason for that is that people watch what you do, not just what you say. So, right, consistency builds confidence, builds trust. Because otherwise, if you're not true to your word across the board, you're going to erode that trust very fast. So again, having that, and it goes back to executive presence, right? You want to make sure that you are known for some key areas. So whether it is that you're the expert global partner, right? You're the one who's going to bridge the gaps that the local market cannot do themselves. So understanding again, what is that extra value and how do you complement your team locally is really key. And to do that, you need to consistently be reminding them and through your actions, right, what you stand for. So that's something that I think, again, was really key for the time there, because you really needed to be a humble leader that showed them that you were there to complement and to enable them to be successful.
Consistency, then. I was thinking, I didn't know what word you were going to come up with, but it's really intriguing. I was going to say maybe just respect, because I feel like when you're traveling to different cultures, just reading the culture and just treating it with respect maybe could be a good one.
Yeah, and it goes back to, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be a humble leader, right? So understanding, and that's it. I think we're kind of saying the same thing in different ways, because as I mentioned, if you understand how you complement the local partner or the person that you're managing across the world, then you can show them the value that you bring. You're not there to replace them. You're not there to kind of override their leadership. You're there to complement and actually to push them to the spotlight. Yeah. So as I mentioned, for that local team in India, part of what success looked like for them was to still have recognition in front of their president. So whenever we had a win, I would step aside and allow the local team to present, to still feel and own, right, the success. Even though this may have been a regional project that I was leading, I wanted them to know that as a humble leader, I am giving them the spotlight. I'm giving them ownership, because it is something that really meant a lot to them. So that is part of the respect that I think you're speaking to.
And by the way, we're getting great comments on the thread. And first of all, warm welcome to some old friends I see on the thread. And feel free to introduce yourself with a LinkedIn if you'd like to network with others. Janaki loves what we're saying about Indian culture. She had first posted that with the burnt Oreo part of our talk, and feels like flexibility could be a key element here, and recognition. And she agrees with the recognition. I'm sorry, I'm assuming it's a she. And then we also have Jonathan, who thinks curiosity is also very key. So maybe they're all
I love
similar.
That. Yes, it's all about asking questions.
For sure.
Understanding the person, the audience.
Do you have examples of a time maybe when trust is well built, and maybe a different one where it's quickly destroyed in different cross-cultural scenarios?
Well built and quickly destroyed? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Any stories or examples of either of those where trust can come together nicely, or where it falls apart very quickly?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So for example, let me tell you one cultural, I guess, something culturally that is very different that sometimes may come across as that's disrupting, but it's not. So for example, when I moved to China, I mentioned that one of my biggest markets, or my biggest market in the region, was China. And that market obviously had been very successful without an American partner, an American leader, or any kind of oversight. However, when we changed the dynamics to try to behave as a global brand, and they created a role for me to move to China and Asia to lead kind of the strategy, the innovation, and the margin for the region, that put me in a place where I had a lot of influence to what the team was doing. And one thing about the Chinese culture, which is great, they're very friendly, amicable. Like, they will always say yes. However, that doesn't mean that they agree. So at first, it was a little bit, as somebody who was learning the culture, I at the beginning, it may have come across as a break of trust. Like, they said they were going to do it, but they did not move forward. However, as I continued to learn the culture, integrating myself in the team, I understood that their politeness was just a dynamic in the culture to show that, hey, I understand, but I'm not there yet. So that just led the opportunity, gave me with that learning, I understood that it was not a break in trust. It was not malicious. It was just that we needed to continue to discuss, and this agreement was going to require more time and effort on both sides so that we could understand how to make it work for the country.
Mm. But that took your curiosity, didn't it?
Yes.
To dig in on that, and get behind that. Whereas some people, I might even just naturally go, oh, they're not being honest with me, they're lying or something to that effect.
Right.
And in many cultures, it's they want to save face or not embarrass you or embarrass themselves, and they might not even see it as what we might say as an American as lying. That's not at all the way that they would see it.
Yes, exactly. And well said. So it goes back to what are the assumptions that we bring as a global leader? And then we have to realize that these are my assumptions based on my country of origin and where I became a leader. But when you go to another country or you manage a global team, you really have to, as you mentioned, and the audience member, you have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to understand and have those honest conversations so that you're really showing yourself and presenting yourself as a coach. Like, for example, similarly to India, but in a different way, I understood that China was the lead market. So whenever I had global teams and global platforms and in the ways of working, I would create a seat at the table for my Chinese counterpart so that they were next to me, even though I didn't need to have them in the meeting when I was in global meetings. I make sure that whenever we were looking for pilots or successes, they had the first dips into volunteering or presenting again, so that they felt that they were not losing in this new dynamic structure. So I think it's really, again, it goes back to understanding people, understanding the leader, and understanding, as you mentioned, not only how to save face, but what does success look like for that leader and that country.
Yeah. Janaki loves that example there. And Michael Papanik, hey, Michael, he has a really fascinating question too. So you're trying to balance the global corporate culture, maybe the culture of the company that you're at with the local. One example I can think of is we've worked forever with Dell, and Dell was very famous. You don't hear it as much. Dell Direct, which is how they sold their PCs, but also they really adopted a just being way more direct with each other method of talking to each other. And I bet in some cultures that wouldn't really fly, perhaps. So how do you balance the culture of the company with the culture that you're interfacing with?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So something that we did and I led for my region was basically establishing and rolling out the ways of working. So you can imagine that every country or every leader, depending on their cultural differences, you may have a different set of norms for the teams, rhythms, traditions, unifying language. So when I went to the region, one thing that I did was visit in person each major country, roll out what the global ways of working were going to be so that they understood what were the key meetings we needed to work towards, what were the key deliverables, what were the expectations, and what was the unifying language that we now needed to speak to so that we were all understanding each other. I think that was going to, again, help alleviate confusion that may happen, across borders. So one thing that I want to mention that again was extremely helpful was really, again, being curious, asking them in the way of working before that was just country based, how they communicated results, what were the rhythms and the approvals that they needed to get for different milestones throughout the year, how was the budget utilized. And part of what I communicated was, as you mentioned, Brian, what were the expectations? So we were rolling out a global framework that had specific elements that needed to remain the same. So in this case of as a marketer, it was how we spoke to the consumer, who the consumer was, right? How Oreo showed up in the market in terms of the marketing and the advertising. However, we also empowered the team to understand what was the local ownership, whether it was flavors, innovation, new products, and what was the new approval process for that. So it was a lot of coaching that it needed to happen in order for them to realize that they still were empowered. They actually had more tools that I would bring, as their thought partner, and basically that I was there to create a seat at the table. And going back to the being a vulnerable leader, it was really showing them that their success was my success. Because even though I was still representing the global team, a bit like a coach, you're maybe hired by the company, but in this case, I was still very much tied to their success, and I want them to realize that, I am not against them, or I'm not somebody who's working for someone else. I am actually somebody who was not only living in the same country, I was really tied to their success, right, financially. So again, that was more of an example of me as a global leader, but I would love to also talk about examples, as a coach, how I work with other folks in global situations.
When you're working across cultures, there can be a sense, maybe for some, of feeling like I'm not being really myself. I'm being inauthentic. I have to behave this certain way, and it doesn't feel like who I am.
Yes.
Do you have ideas for leaders who might be struggling with that? How do you assist them?
I think that's a fantastic question. I would say let's go back to your values as a leader. Right. So in my coaching discussions, I a lot of times start, our engagements, again, getting to know, the coachee and asking, what are their core values? What drives them as people? I don't know if you realize, Brian, or the audience, that we as people, as humans, we develop our core values starting in our childhood, and they're pretty set by the age of 22, right? Early young adulthood. And what happens is that as we grow older and our life stages evolve, how the core value shows up changes, but the core value remains the same. So for example, if I am somebody who loves connection, right? When I graduated from Columbia University, everybody, the 800 classmates of mine, knew who Jenny Fernandez was.
Not surprised.
However, nowadays, as a much older individual, a few decades later, my connection is more of a small, intimate group, my little board of directors, right? My community, like the Marshall Goldsmith community that we both belong to. So it's a much smaller community, still connected, but I want to make sure that I'm curating, who I'm working with, who I bring into my circle. So this is how it changes. So for leaders, really understanding what drives them. Is this a person that is driven financially, not because they want to be recognized, they want to be able to have a recognition that it shows up in their salary, in their bonus, because they're focused on delivering for their family. So that is important to know, versus somebody who may be at an earlier stage in their career where success and their core value of recognition may require just faster promotion, more moves, etc. So again, it's going back to what are their core values, and how can you again ensure that their projects, their jobs, and their potential is being seen through that lens.
And of course, every time you're reconnecting with who you are, your core values, you do feel more grounded, don't you? But then you need to figure out how to express those in a way that also works with the other cultures that you're interacting with, I would think. All right, this is a great question from Michael. I'll switch to this one. So he's writing, what tends to vary the most by culture? And there could be some choices like hiring and firing protocols, or how meetings are run, or decision making, or how is conflict handled. Any of those elements or others that you find can be incredible variances between different types of cultures.
Oh, it's very interesting. Yeah. So I think potentially one would be kind of inclusiveness in terms of decision making, right? So I think some cultures hold decision making closer in to the higher ups in the organization. versus empowering, every level to have some level of autonomy. So I think that is one change, one difference that I've noticed, that some countries really focus their younger talent on pure execution, because again, especially depending on where they are in the world, again, if it's an emerging market, execution is what makes them great, right? Getting the product out or distribution, etc. But in other countries, I think talent is more eager to progress, and the expectation is that you may be progressing faster. So in those cultures, again, usually more developed markets, you will see a different level of autonomy in terms of decision making. So you may have a RACI where people understand when they can make decisions, when they need to elevate to their manager or to other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or here in the US, sometimes we're very driven, we're very much decision by consensus. And you can do that up to a point, because then there's analysis paralysis, right? You need to be able to make a decision within the information that you have and just assess the risk.
And I could see in many of what Michael wrote here could be some great differences. Like I think different cultures probably handle conflict differently. You've just cited the example of maybe I believe they call that power distance, right? In some cultures, they have great respect for the leader or leaders.
Yes, differential.
Yeah, and so whatever the leader says kind of goes. And in others, yeah, it is a lot more participative and inclusive in how they talk about things. So this next question from Jonathan, going back to questions about leaders flexing, I think there can be a basic identity issue. Is a leader willing to notice and revisit assumptions? For example, is what he's pointing
That's a great
out.
observation.
I'm just curious, how did you learn all of this? So, you came to the States and now you're figuring things out, of course. And now you get into these global corporations and global roles and you move to China. Where did you learn? Were there books? Were there consultants? I mean, how did you figure this out yourself to do this? Just as a person, as a human, before even becoming such a specialist?
No, it's a great question. I think, part of it I'll definitely attribute it to the fact that I am global myself. And I came from a culture in Latin America where a little bit more communal in nature, meaning, just as you mentioned, Brian, part of the core values that I was raised was to be very differential. So, right. So whatever the senior ups, you do a great job and you expect recognition to be given. However, I learned later on when I joined the workforce that in the US, we're a little bit more individualistic, in the sense that you need to speak up for yourself. You need to build your brand. You need to self-promote. You need to find mentors, sponsors. And that was a learning that I had as a leader myself. And that's part of the reason why some of the workshops and training and coaching that I do are on executive presence, on self-promotion. And maybe you can share with the audience some of my Harvard Business Review articles on those topics. They have been so successful and welcome. And then another thing that I will mention is that I started my career as a consultant. So I worked for Accenture for 5 years. And again, as a young adult, 20-something, going to organizations like Nordstrom's, like Sara Lee, like Miller Brewing Company, it was very humbling because you needed to establish yourself as a young consultant. Yet I was working with people twice my age who had been working at the company for 15 to 20 years. And I needed to very much vulnerably be curious, ask questions, understand what the problem was, offer confidence that I was valuing their opinion, and actually, very much asking them, what do you think is the solution? Because many times the person, knows very much what are potential solutions. Why are some of those solutions not possible, right? What are the derailers? And this is actually something that empowers you for me, as back then as a young professional and now as a coach, to really understand what is the leader sitting in front of me facing? What are the challenges that they have? and potentially see what are some blind spots. Because what I learned from Accenture is that I had the backing of a large organization with models, experiences, with a team that I could go back to and again discuss so that we could understand what are ways that we can, provide solutions, make suggestions, and co-create together.
That's fascinating because you had to come into so many situations with a curiosity. Even coming to the States must have been a massive experiment in that
Yes.
for you. And then now, okay, in being a consultant with Accenture, now you're going to all kinds of different organizations and trying to figure out how to add value, how things are done around here. And any of us who've been in consulting learn that, decently quickly because, different companies have different cultures. So you're figuring that out along the way. And then, of course, your natural curiosity must have played a massive role in how you did at a bigger and bigger scale.
Yes, yeah, exactly, right. So you nailed it. Understanding different cultures was really key. Understanding people, because as Daniel Pink will say, we're all in the people business. Regardless of what business we're in, we're all in the people business because we're always selling our ideas, whether it is internally to our, key stakeholders, our cross-functional teams, our direct reports. They we have to convince that, right, that they have to trust the process, get the training, get the feedback, pivot, and also managing up as we, try to sell our ideas of what the future looks like, of what growth we want to drive, or basically even how fast we can advance. So I think it was, again, just a masterclass in terms of understanding different cultures, learning different leadership styles, and building my own.
Great examples, says Deirdre. Yeah, and I'll add too, there's lots of great resources out there. Of course, the classic studies by Hofstede, which I learned about in graduate school, and I don't quite remember when they all ran, but those set up a beautiful framework that's still very relevant today for the different dimensions in which cultures can vary. And much more recently, Erin Meyer's work with the culture map is another great resource. Her book was fascinating, and there's sort of a tool where you say, I'm this culture and I'm managing that culture. And then it kind of points out the places where those cultures could vary, which I also found quite interesting. She has some great examples, for example, giving a speech in Japan and asking for any questions, anyone, and no one had a question. And then she almost sat down and the host said, hold on, let me ask the question again. He gets up, any questions for our speaker? And then he somehow picks one or two people who aren't even looking up and says, you must have a question. And they did. So reading the air, I think it's called, in a culture like that, where they could pick up the subtle cues that at least some of us as Americans would just flat out miss.
Yeah. So, and I'll add something else, Brian, that something that I learned through my expat assignment as well is that sometimes we focus a little too much on the differences, but at the end of the day, as a marketer, when you double click on what drives consumer behavior or person's behavior, it's about the humanity and the impact, right? So like, just to go back to the little Oreo cookie example, at the end of the day, all moms want to reward their kids for a hard day in school, right? For doing great. And that reward is, again, that connection that a moment, eating a cookie and milk, etc. abroad was the same across the board, even though in China, nobody drank milk at the time, right? Having milk is really not part of the regular culture. The country has, again, that was like 15 years ago. The country has continued to move on because ultimately they really wanted to incorporate calcium into the children's diet. But when we brought Oreo into the country, we knew that that was not part of the culture. But it was, again, it's really even though it wasn't, when you talked about what mothers wanted for their kids, it was, right, health, it was enjoyment, it was to bring a smile to them and to have a shared moment. So that at the core of our humanity was the same.
That's brilliant. So true, says Janaki. Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, I love that. So to maybe get us thinking always about what are those similarities? What do we have in common as humans? I remember Marshall Goldsmith, who I worked for, I had an assignment for him. I sent him off to Saudi Arabia for his first time. And we talked so much about all the differences between America and Saudi Arabia and how it's going to be different and so forth. And he came back and he was like, they're not that different than us, really. I mean, they care about all the same things we do. You know, they love their children. They want the best for them. They care about each other. You know, he just, the way he described
Yes.
His experience, it was just, we're all still humans in the end with very similar needs. We're almost out of time, Jenny. I'll come with my last question, and I'll keep an eye here for questions on the thread as well. And then I have a couple final announcements. But what single piece of advice would you give any leader who's listening to this, who's about to step into their first global role? What kind of advice would you give them? Besides hire a consultant or a coach, right? I mean, we know that.
But... yes, no, definitely. So I would say stay curious, right? So because as we started the conversation, it's really about listening to the other person, really understanding what are their core values, what is it that they want, what would success look like for them, earning that trust and influence with the right people, so that again you are empowered to act and empowered to make an impact. So before we judge and before we bring in all of our assumptions, it's just really remembering that we need to integrate ourselves into the culture. I would say, if you have the budget, visit the countries where your teams are. Ensure that you have one global meeting so that everybody's there in person. And for that, I think it's always great to bring, I did plenty of those, and we would have in-person meetings. We create our own team culture, create our norms, our ways of working. And if you can have help so that you can get all of that architected and orchestrated, that's even better. Because you want to make sure that curiosity and that in-person interaction helps build connection. You want people to feel connected as humans so that they can accelerate performance and solve problems that are ultimately going to come up, right? So that's, I think, what is great about being a global leader.
I love it, and it's something I do is having traveled a ton, and I'm multicultural myself. I'm American. My dad's American. My mom's Turkish. So I've only grown up in the States, but learning about different cultures. And, one thing as simple as in many cultures, their personal space is much closer than we might do here in the States. And what I found is if someone's doing something and I'm in another country that I think is rude, and in my head, I'm like, that's rude. Why is he standing this close to me? Get curious and see they're probably not trying to be rude. It's actually maybe an intercultural thing that I'm experiencing right here, right now. To them, that's not rude because they tend to stand closer to each other than we're used to as Americans. So I want to share a couple final slides, and like in line at the ATM, Michael says, yes. I saw this one researcher do studies where he took pictures of how far apart people stand at a bus stop in different countries in Europe. And I guess the Finns, the people from Finland, stand super far from each other. It was a hilarious photo. He showed how far away they're standing from each other compared to other cultures, of course. Like someone mentions Hong Kong. I remember old lady shuffling past me to get to a bus in Hong Kong, and she shoved me out of the way, like with her arm. And luckily I had read that that's not uncommon and not considered rude. I thought it was really rude, but hey, thankfully I learned. So I didn't respond in any way. Thank you, Janaki, thanking us for our time here. I'm going to share just a couple of final slides because if you are a client of CoachSource, we have a special private invitation for you. If you're not a client at CoachSource, we might be able to still make it work. I'm going to be teaching a sprint series for corporations on how they could maximize their coaching efforts, called Coaching for Results for HR leaders. I'm doing this with Executive Networks. Some of you may know them, very prestigious organization of private networking groups and their online platform, HR Next. This will start in January, and they're letting me invite our clients and selected guests for free to this event, which also includes a membership to HR Next. So this will start in January of next year. There's a link there, but if you're having any troubles registering, just contact me, Brian at CoachSource.com. So we want to make sure our clients know that's available for them. And that's getting towards the end. That was the last announcement I wanted to make. We also included Jenny's LinkedIn. We included her, as she did here. We also included her massive number of writings. So the Jenny in the Press we have put up here as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so HBR and everything is there as well. And so Jenny, I'd love to thank you for spending this time. Hopefully everyone can see, as I do, how just incredibly open and friendly she is, that she's super responsive. And I'm sure if you connect with her on LinkedIn, I don't know where you get the time, Jenny, especially to work on a PhD. I don't know where she gets that time, but thank you so much for doing this with us today. And what's the PhD topic? Okay, we can end on that.
Oh, that's great. Organizational change and leadership. So my dissertation will focus on how U.S. organizations can reskill the workforce to be ready for the era of AI.
Oh yeah, that's very timely. Now, are you at USC for that?
Yes, at the University of Southern California. Yeah.
My alma mater. Okay, I love it. Yes, I remember we talked about that. All right, we're gonna everyone have a great rest of your starting weekend here. We greatly enjoyed having you. We will have more of these starting next year in February. We'll skip January's First Friday, too soon, but February we'll get started up again with events. Since you are here, you'll be notified about our next events as we get them started. Happy holidays, everyone, and make it a great weekend. We'll see you later.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Jenny. See you.
Thanks.